It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza, good morning.
Hello, Irwin.
You know, Esperanza, this is, I don't know if this is exactly a new lane we're going down. It might be considered that. Essentially, to our audience of Our Hamptons podcast, we're going back to Freetown, a podcast we did previously. I forgot what season, 90 some odd episodes. I sort of lose track, Esperanza.
Understandable.
But we did speak to the history, and we have a special guest, a longtime Freetown resident who's really going to amplify the factual history with a very personal one. And I think I'm going to bring our special guest on right now. So without further ado, Mr. Kevin Scott, a warm welcome to Our Hamptons podcast.
Yes.
Good morning, and thank you for your invitation.
Oh, we're excited to see you. You know, look, Esperanza, we've both known Kevin for a bit, but earlier this summer, Kevin did a walking tour with us. I'm putting on my other hat as East Hampton's Trails, Esperanza, but we did a walking tour, I think, at the end of July with Kevin and a couple of his neighbors.
Let's make sure everybody knows, because Irwin, not everyone knows what the East Hampton Trails Preservation Society is, and you are the president. So
oh my God, Esperanza.
Yeah, we gotta give the context.
Okay.
Very important.
You know, see, Kevin, I know you've listened to some of our episodes, but it's very important for me to have a voice of reason, and Esperanza tends to be that voice of reason. She's, pushes me back into a lane when I start to meander. So thank you. Yes, the East Hampton Trails Preservation Society. We've been around since 1980. Yes, we walk the trails, our beautiful trail network, but we've also gotten more involved in historical walking tours, collaborative events. We've done it with Esperanza with one of her other hats, with Wayne Scott Heritage Project, among other things. But we did one with another one of his neighbors, Dr. Karen Smith, and also with Allison McGovern. And
again, may I just say,
please do.
Dr. Allison McGovern, who, for those who haven't listened to the Freetown episode, has been exploring this part of East Hampton, and we'll get into that geography soon. But she is an archaeologist, and she has been delving into the history of this really unique part of the town and part of the village, really, of East Hampton.
Exactly right. And again, we should really, well, we already did an episode about Freetown, about the history. We should really just frame it, Esperanza and Kevin. If I go by, I'm going to ask Kevin really what he feels the definition is. But, basically, if I go, this is really came right off of Columbia University's website, which we used in the last episode, Esperanza. It was actually written by Preservation Long Island and Freetown.
Well, and I think it's more written by Dr. Allison McGovern. I mean, she's the one that has been feeding this information to these different sources.
And collaborating, I guess, with Long Island Preservation, published it under their banner.
It's actually on Columbia University's website as well. It's part of their Mapping the African American Past program.
And I'm just really going to go, before I turn it over to Kevin, just to define the geographics of this, which is a small, unincorporated hamlet within the town of East Hampton. And this is probably a loose boundary, but we're going to use this just as some sort of guideline for our audience more than anything else. Located along 3 Mile Harbor Road, between Jackson Street, which is really village fringe, very close, to around Abraham's Path. And Kevin, would you go with that as a loose geographical perspective, location?
I think that's in the ballpark. I just want to dovetail on what Esperanza said. Dr. McGovern has done essential work, roughly over the last decade, in the Mapping Memories project, Fowler House, the restoration of that some years ago, and then laying out, resurrecting what should have been recognized as it relates to the district or the area that encompasses Freetown. So roughly the boundaries are from the junction of 3 Mile Harbor Springs Fireplace to the harbor to roughly Calvary Baptist Church. So if you draw which is on the Springs Fireplace side, if you
Yeah,
draw
almost
kind
like
of
a triangle. Yeah.
yeah, all those of us who live here, you do a little triangle. That's really the boundary. But as Dr. McGovern's research has indicated, within those boundaries are what she refers to as micro enclaves or micro neighborhoods. So where we did the walk that started at Calvary Baptist Church and went into our area behind the settlement house, or what some people call the neighborhood house, is one micro enclave. There was Morris Park is another very, very important thread within the triangle of history. Calvary by itself is a very important thread of how folks constructed that church in the late 50s, early 60s, mid 60s. And then there's a relatively related area that relates to some of the first African Americans who settled after World War II on Town Line Road. There's a little segment there. So that, because we talk about the Hayes family, some of the generational families that we may talk about as we go through this, that encompasses kind of the geographics of the area.
Is that Town Lane? Is that
yes.
what you're referring to? Okay, yeah.
So that's kind of the area. And what her work has done, and what we are interested in doing, is preserving the oral and lived history, the important structures, the now documented important archaeology, the artifacts, the foundations, the old houses, cottages, dugouts, whatever term you want to use, going back to from the time of enslavement of African Americans and Montauk in this area to Reconstruction to today. So the story of how Freetown was founded is a fact that we have to discuss, whether folks like to discuss it or not. So I call fact deconstruction a way to continue lack of knowledge. So the fact, if you don't want to hear something that you don't want to process, then you can never change or incorporate other people's ideas. I think when we did our walk, some folks weren't opposed to facts. They were just the positivity of that walk that thank you for sponsoring again, was that they had a moment of hearing the wind blow through the trees and seeing a living history and people and buildings and my wacky personality, if it, talking, whatever that's all about. And they were able to see our commonality. And that's why it was so successful and moving, as I saw the expressions on many folks' faces. But the history goes back to the Gardner family as one of the largest slaveholding families in this region. And there's an issue, I believe, in East Hampton, and I'll be very candid about it, where there's a belief that slavery shouldn't be, well, there's some folks who, not just in East Hampton, but throughout the country, we won't get into politics here, but we don't want to dwell on that. We don't want to talk about that. It's over, get over it. I didn't enslave anybody. And okay, I've heard that, and that's fine. However,
or I did, but I treated, we were
yeah.
fair, we were just.
There is a thread where, because chattel slavery as related to northern states, New York, New England, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, name one, was benign as compared to the brutal plantations of the South. That is a misnomer. That's just not true.
It's like Kevin. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's more along. It's aligned with saying there's a good terrorist or a bad terrorist.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So you can't put doilies around things that are bad in the first place and say that it's genteel or that folks are treated. They had 3 hots and a cot and we all got along. That wasn't the case, and history doesn't support that. Common sense doesn't support that. But as I was saying when we did the tour, and I think what we're talking about today is kind of a part 2 of that. Our discussion is that we don't dwell on it to the extent that it destroys us. We learn from it, and we become powerful and empowered and proud of being an American success story despite that. And that's what Freetown is.
Yeah. Yes, and it's a story of resilience. I mean, it's
correct.
It's totally about,
And
perseverance, will, resilience, mutual support. In other words, we are a diverse community. Yeah. And we get along and we look out for each other, and we, whatever, if somebody just had we're getting old, as you said, and so am I, if I had a surgery and my neighbors can go get groceries for me, that's what we are today. And as difficult as it has been for people of color to attain generational wealth, because I have neighbors who are in their 90s and been here 75 years, there are 3-4 generations. Now within that household, granddaughters going to college, two in two in medical school, one in law school. That's the pot that's here. It isn't that there's any difference between anybody else. It is that the presumption that the people on the other side of the tracks who were dumped here to supply chattel labor for an indentured work camp have clawed out of that and created something quite remarkable. And that's what people saw on the tour.
And I have to touch on this because part of the mission of our Hamptons podcast, and to an extent, Esperanza, or even East Hampton Trails Preservation Society, when we do these walks, it's not only the depth that Kevin is going into with this particular community, but it's just the overall awareness. We've spoken about this on our Hamptons podcast a lot, and we've done tours in Lazy Point. I've had people that lived in Amagansett for 20 years say to me, I never knew this existed. You know, like they're so wrapped up, either they look but don't see, I can't explain it, or they're just not entrenched deeply in the community. But, you know, we've noted this really very frequently. And Kevin, you started to go on to this personal vein. Now, you came here from the Midwest. Kevin, like us, Esperanza, is not a Bonacker. Okay, so you came, which is not a crime on our Hamptons podcast, mind you, but you came here from the Midwest. When you got here, I mean, did you know Freetown's history when you moved here, or did you just happen to locate into Freetown and discovered the community you were living in?
I did know Freetown's history. And I think it's important to say that Freetown's history is a part of the thread of how African Americans throughout this country, coming out of our lived experience from slavery to Reconstruction to Jim Crow to state-sponsored terrorism, which was reflected in lynching, to the Civil Rights era, to redlining, to wherever you think we are now. Those threads are not the story of our existence, all built out of, oh, someone treated me wrong and boo-hoo, boo-hoo. All those steps that I just described link to communities like this one and like Sands, because that could be a prototype for what we're talking about. The Inkwell in Massachusetts, where segregation meant that Blacks who strove for homeownership or to have their own communities had to do it separately, but through perseverance and through hard work and through capturing the essence of what the American success story is, despite these artificial structural issues, still broke through. So Sands, Inkwell, Chicken Bone Beach in Atlantic City, Bruce's Beach in Los Angeles, Detroit Black Bottom, Chicago Bronzeville, which, you know, I know that neighborhood because I have family when I was growing up in the West. And you balance those successes against the same threads of exclusion, like the Rosewood Massacre, the Tulsa Massacre, Orangeburg. We walked through the beautiful Central Park, but when Fred Olmsted designed it, he used the displaced Seneca Black people to build it after they were run out of their own homes. Okay. The Central Park Reservoir sits on top of one of the largest Seneca settlements. So we have a dichotomy in this country where we have a thread of not having access, but a threat of defeating that lack of access with the success you saw when you walk this area and when you see the success of people who decide to work together to have something in commonality to serve their dreams and their desires. And it would be a travesty to not preserve that. So when I learned of Freetown decades ago, I wouldn't say that I would say that our decision was somewhat intentional, but also somewhat lucky because a house became available, because, housing is so tough to acquire. But as we learned about Freetown actually deciding to buy a property here, besides being here for many years before that, the narrative was, that's the other side of the tracks. That's Colored Town. That's over there. That's you can pass by, but be careful, especially it's kind of shaky. And it was not desirable, and it was seen as them over there, them meaning not the thread of East Hampton. For people of color to drive through the one of the most wealthiest communities on the planet and see these names, as Donna Marie Barnes says at the at Sylvester Manor, the research center, and the Plain Sight Project talks about that. Those name, if a street is named after you, you or your family was a slaveholder. I don't crucify or attack those families, but when I drive by and see that, I connect the thread of what I just described with what we've overcome, but what we should not forget. That's why we were so interested in Freetown. That's why Freetown is something that we see as emulating the threads of success. Isabel Wilkerson talks about the internal migration. We had to come from the deep South, our great grandparents, and migrate to northern cities like New York, like East Hampton, like Sands, like Los Angeles, like Washington, D.C. Our migration was not chain migration, it was removing chains to migrate. You see, I've heard people come up to me in East Hampton and introduce themselves. They want to talk about our community, come over. And by the way, I want to say on the record while you're recording, anyone would like to come visit us, the best way to unravel preconceived notions is to interact with human beings. Come over, visit us, please. It's an open invitation. We'll feed you. We'll take care of you. Come over here.
Esperanza, we've also heard that Kevin is a renowned chef. I mean,
Oh,
this
yes.
might be it might be an opportunity on multiple levels.
Kevin, be careful because you might
Yeah, exactly, Kevin. Be
might
careful
have
what
too
you wish
many
for.
guests. I can vouch for the deliciousness of your creations.
Yeah,
I
they
think
may be knocking down the doors here.
food is love and food is therapy, and I think that we feel that everyone should be welcome and we should be hospitable. So much groundwork has been made in the last year or two in just that platform. If you think you don't agree, that's fine. If you do agree, that's fine. If you want to become link arms with us, whatever your beliefs are, then come over. The most frustrating thing I find it and having to explain and have people understand where our place in East Hampton should be, because in East Hampton there is a framework of sustaining a history of the colonial period to the present. There are nearly 50, as Dr. Smith, our lovely neighbor, the neighbor whose family's been here, her mother's in her late 90s, 74 years. She's one of 8 siblings. So you have the framework of these generational families that can speak to what their lived experience is. When people say to me, you're just not in my backyardism and you're just stubborn and you don't want development and growth. Development and growth in this community has kind of gotten out of control, but that would be its total. That would be 4 hours of discussion. Our issue is there's a difference between development and erasure. So erasing our history is not acceptable. Development that's done thoughtfully without destroying artifacts and important buildings and generational homes and a lived history is something we should be striving toward together, no matter what color background or your Banneker or you're this or whatever your flag is. That's wonderful. And that's where the disconnect has been.
Yeah,
It's been decided unilaterally by a large apparatus that this history is not quite as meaningful, therefore. And once you make that kind of positive, you can then reconcile anything. There are 50 museums here that celebrate, demonstrate, are funded privately and publicly around the history of East Hampton from the colonial period. The folks that got off the boat and the turnbuckle shoes and lovely, none that reflect the history of the Montaukett and formerly enslaved African American who were dumped into this parcel by the largest slaveholders in the region to sustain chattel slavery and the income and enterprise of human beings supporting a labor base for the wealthy. We can't stop. We can't say, oh, well, get over it. If you'd worked harder, we wouldn't be talking about this. We have worked hard. That's the point.
Now,
Kevin,
Kevin,
and the thing is, there's nothing I think what people, they have a reaction that's so radical, and it's not radical to want to preserve your history. It's not, and it's become even more of a contentious subject. So Irwin, sorry, go ahead.
there is one point, Kevin, you use this, and again, a lot of what you said is also framed. Kevin and I arrived here more or less the same time. I think Kevin mentioned 1990. I was here in 1989. You used the term when you first got here. It was perceived as the other side of the tracks, quote unquote. The same way we have an episode with Paul Goldberg referred to those village streets in East Hampton were the other side of the tracks. Suffice to say, especially within East Hampton town, there's really no such thing as the other side of the tracks anymore.
Not
You know,
anymore, yeah.
No,
there is no
precisely.
such thing. And that same argument that you made could be made about Sands when that was developed.
Of course.
The other side of the, yeah, these things, everything. There is no other side of the tracks here. And as you mentioned, ad nauseum, we could discuss monster-sized homes being built on very nondescript, modest streets and springs in Northwest. But
And that's
um,
exactly the point, though, that Kevin is making,
yeah,
because it involves a whole moment of then erasure when you're not managing that change in a more sensitive way that is informed and considers this history.
Kevin,
Part of history has the history and equality have to be synonymous. You see, it either by intent or by indifference. When one makes one's history ascendant over another's artificially, we're in trouble, all of us.
Kevin, is the change we've all witnessed in East Hampton, the change you alluded to, the change I just alluded to, has that for you and the community at whole, I mean, increased its, wow, we better expedite, we better move faster because things are changing so rapidly? I mean, that's happening in other communities. Do you find yourself trying to accelerate your message because of that?
Yes, absolutely, on many levels. In fact, our community, people who live here of all backgrounds, feel that we're under siege because what was once, for instance, when African Americans began to buy little fishing cottages and for $1,000 of plots of lands and sands. I've friends and family there. You know, it was marshland. It was, it was you had to wear hip waders to get to your little cottage and
Right.
pump it out and by hand. If it rained in the 50s and 60s, now it is the Gold Coast.
Yes.
There's this rabid craze to, like you said, to build 7,000 square foot houses on 0.18 of,
Right.
and towering shadows and arguments over beach rights where Black people weren't allowed to go to certain beaches. Now folks who've been there for generations are being run off.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be candid about that. And so there has to be a point where we go, wait a minute, stop. And so I don't think that any human being, no matter their background or their religion or their ethnic background or what their faith, whatever they believe, would willingly say to me, I don't want, if they have pictures of their families on their mantle, they have you were talking about your grandchildren coming to visit this past summer and so on. They have their traditions. I don't think any human being would want someone to tap them on the shoulder and say, that history is not important. Where your mom's buried is not important. People in Tulsa got firebombed in the 20s. That was the Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. These were thriving Black communities. And the other thing that we're concerned about, when you take that example of the Tulsa bombings, these folks came back from the war, built banks, built hospitals, built you name it, but they were bombed out when their gains became too unacceptable to the formerly rich communities. Then those communities wipe them out. So you can either firebomb them out, or you can change zoning rules, or you can use eminent domain, or you can build a highway through a Black community. That's the history that we're trying to avoid.
So yes, not to be subjugated again and again and again.
And what we have is been done with our fingers in our work. In other words, nobody gives anybody houses. Nobody. If I have this house appraised and you have your house appraised, our skin color determines that number. And the fact that people don't believe that is a problem. The fact that Long Island remains as segregated in housing as it was when King marched on Washington is a fact, which also amplifies why we should make sure that we don't destroy the successes that people have had, no matter what their color is.
But Kevin, I understand the points you're making, and I think they're valid, as up island for sure. But here, the lines are far more blurred than they are up island, in terms of, and you could see it in the housing values in what once were traditionally African American communities, such as Sands, such as Freetown. I noticed a house on West Drive on Zillow the other day asking $1.7 million. So I'll ask the question to you. Can we paint with the same brush what's going on up island versus what's going on in the town of East
Absolutely.
Hampton.
I think you can.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I think you made a point I was going to get to later, but you actually got right to it, and it's
That's because
extremely
I give
important.
segues on our Hamptons podcast, Kevin. We do a lot of segues here.
This is a great segue.
Thank you.
The astronomical increase in pricing of housing in East Hampton, off the chart, and lack of developable land is the fulcrum that pushes this kind of manic behavior. It does not remove bias. It does not remove the fact that when we bought this house, we were told, don't show the house to Black people because they have no money. In our lived experiences and in all statistics that support what I'm saying, we don't have to, tie up the whole podcast with that. That is the fact. Newsday did a 2.5-year study, 2 Pulitzers they won, on how, including this town, steering, redlining, so forth and so on. But not to belabor that point, it may sound counterintuitive. Those things exist. However, they are eclipsed by the fact that 1/2 acre of land is like platinum. There is no the struggle to take any piece of land, even a former sand pit, or name something that could even be dangerous and toxic. We're going to build on it, no matter what. We're going to turn this into, I don't know, Palm Beach. So the reason Freetown is now desirable is not because of what the land cost, is because it costs less somewhat than other areas.
That's
And
correct.
it needs to, and there are folks who have speculated in capturing it at a lower cost ratio.
Right.
And
Right.
therefore the people who are already there are expendable.
Yep. Yeah.
So $1.7 million house on West Drive, which again is in the undesirable bubble, used to be over there. That's ashtray money.
Yeah, but again, to use your word, the undesirable bubble in the town of East Hampton continues to expand.
It's never been undesirable to us.
No.
The crossover from undesirable to appropriate is now eclipsed what we've already built.
I'm living in Springs as I have for 36 years. We don't want to go, quote unquote, Esperanza, all the way up to Springs, right? That theme transcends a lot of lines. And again, for me, it still is a little more blurred here because of the fact that everything is desirable, which is, to some people, that's wonderful. To other people, it's a problem and again, we could go into tangents here to Kevin's point about the lack of affordable housing and everything else. I mean, so there's a lot of issues at play. Esperanza, it's almost under the umbrella for a small town. Man, we have big city problems in a small town like no other, for me, as far as I'm concerned.
It's because we have big city people.
And we have wealth beyond imagination. People, when you have wealth beyond imagination, you move to a point where those who have that framework believe that rules don't apply to them.
Mhm.
I will do what I want because my wealth allows me to change the rules and impose whatever I decide to serve the ends I've already made the decision for. A lot of what I get in pushback is, perhaps what you're saying might make sense, Kevin, but we've already decided. So shut up. That too is a thread.
Right. In my father's famous words, my mind is made up. Don't confuse me with facts.
My dad, exactly. My dad, military guy, career. I was a military brat. Dad, why? Exactly. Questions were always answered with that sentence. I get that, but when somebody that doesn't look like me is telling me what I should accept, that destroys what I've worked for. I don't think that most human beings, including myself, are going to go, okay, that's not manageable.
Now, Kevin,
and the question is more that why should you versus, I don't know, you, Irwin, or I don't know, a Bonnaker of multiple generations, why should anyone accept that quote unquote truth?
Precisely.
now,
So
Kevin,
I respect everyone's a struggle and achievement, and I respect their fear of what's going on. I respect their anxiety. I share the same things, and that's why we need to make sure that we unfilter the nonsense of presupposition and replace it with like the walking tour, like what we're calling an educational program about who we are and where we live and what this community. It. Let me just divert for a second. I keep hearing the word community as if we're not a part of it. That's the biggest issue for me. It just makes my molars grind off. I can't process the word community being used. And let me say frankly, some ellipse dot, but that's not you. So when you say we are the community, we know everybody pays taxes, everybody's part, everybody votes, we're Americans. But I think that we have to be very candid in this discussion that part of the rationale to appropriate and ignore and take and not to have Freetown be its own cultural district with the appropriate historic landmarks of the Calvary Church, the Settlement House, the Neighborhood House, the restoration of the St. Matthew's Chapel coming back. That's being discussed. This we think should go on the Calvary grounds, and so on. The leveraging the 800 graves that Plain Sight has found and marking those so that we have virtual reality tours to talk about where those are and why they are and what they mean. When you start talking about those things, some folks roll their eyes and go, "Oh, that's really, come on, well, nobody cares about that.
Right.
That's not really important.
Why is that significant?" Yes. Yeah.
Why is that significant? Well, you're just, there's no more land left in the East Hampton, and you should just shut up. And we got to do this.
Well, Kevin,
And I would include, Kevin, even the existing senior center, which was once
exactly
which was a juke joint.
Juke joint, and where because of segregation, artists performing throughout the region had to come out. They would stay in homes with other African American Montauk people who lived here, be able to have dinner, and then go on to their But that's the same thing that happened in Selma, the same thing that happened in the Deep South, in the Chitlin Circuit. It is the exact same experience.
Kevin, Esperanza, I have to also interject because it's extraordinary, really, how often in the 90 some odd episodes of Our Hamptons podcast, we yet again can quote here William Pickens Jr., who all those years ago said, "Are we a community or a commodity?" And again, we touched on all of this, and to Kevin's point, and he's right. We could go down a rabbit hole and be on here for 8 hours discussing this. These issues are just, they seem to be never ending. But Kevin, we're going to try to start wrapping up, but I want to take us into your neighborhood now. Like, I mean, living in this community as you do, like, what is the sense within that boundary of where you live, the interaction with your neighbors? Because when we did the walk with East Hampton Trails, and Kevin literally pointed out houses. There's my neighbor X, Y, and Z. It seems to be, Esperanza, I'm going to say, for me, that's the kind of community I want to live in, where I know my neighbors, where I can count on
for each other. Yes,
I can count on my neighbors. Kevin, I have Airbnb surrounding me, so I feel the lack of community. Also, and I have one neighbor. I love them to death. They're my immediate next door neighbors. I mean, I crave that.
But in a place where now everyone is afraid of being seen and has a privacy fence, hedge, and not to say you don't have fences in your neighborhood, but there are open yards. There's more of an sort of a welcoming aspect to that, and so in a place where we're losing that, where your neighbor isn't even there for 8 months out of the year or more,
or it's a hotel,
or it's yes, exactly. Please take us through your neighborhood.
Well, it's great. That's a fabulous question, and I have a multi-part answer, and it's all happy. So well, the first little funny part is we think it's a hidden paradise, and like a secret forest kind of thing. So we often joke that way. And what we find is when people come to visit us, especially someone who's never been here, even folks who, like you said, Esperanza, people who live in East Hampton but never been to this part of East Hampton. And I think the backyard, like ours, Linda's, we walk through, my next door neighbor.
Right. And let me just point out, because many people have driven through, it's a drive. It's sort of like Wayne Scott. It's a drive through. But once you walk a place, that is when you get the true sense and the essence.
Exactly. And I have to continue to interject, Esperanza. This has happened on East Hampton Trails walks in the past. The same experience with
Yeah.
Kevin. It has happened when we went to Leisure-Rama. It has happened when we went to Wayne Scott with you. I'm telling you,
It slows people down
it's
to really look and appreciate.
you know,
It's
you
about
drive by in
appreciation.
a car, you look, but you don't see, you don't feel.
Mhm.
Yes, well, that's a beautiful house, but you don't really get anything more than that out of it. And I think, and Kevin, I think this is where we really want to close with, so we really want to give our audience the gist of that. As Esperanza said, take us into your neighborhood.
When we ask people to visit, we're asking, step out of the silo for a second, whether it's the car or you're just passing through. And that's not a derogatory statement. It's an invitation. It's a hallowed ground. And I think that people sense it within moments of being here. Wind blowing through the trees, birds chirping, a time capsule. You can see modern to when this was rough hewn, basically undeveloped land, timber that people just basically chop down with their hands in order to have a subsistence life. You can see that entire time capsule in a little walkabout. It's a miniature, it's a baby United Nations. It's all kinds of people. It's multi-generational people. It's folks of color who've been here for, as I said, I'll give you some examples. It's families that have been here sooner than later than that. We've seen folks who, when we moved here, their kids were 8 or 9. Now they're in college. It's a place of pride because nobody accepted that it was the other side and it couldn't be saved, it couldn't be done. Nobody wants those houses. If you're going to show that house, put your family photos away because that'll lower the price. Nobody believes that, and nobody projects that kind of negativity and that kind of assumption that growing something through hard work will pay itself off. And that doesn't mean monetarily, by the way. It's a place where folks engage based on their commonality of success, their commonality of what they want for their next generation of family members. Esperanza, you know Mrs. Gilbert, who lives next door to us.
My
One of the first,
kindergarten teacher.
exactly. There isn't a person that comes here that doesn't literally pay. I mean, this bows. This
Exactly.
person changed my life. This person was my first teacher. They influenced me. When I was not confident or I had a problem, even more so sometimes in my own family, she could give me a hug and gave me confidence. So what we're saying is, who in their right mind would want to plow that down with an excavator? I think that would be insane. And then you have 4 generations, her daughters, her granddaughters, Cecil Blow, you passed his house, his daughters. I just saw his daughter walk. I remember her biking as a little kid. Now she's living in finished medical school and moved out of state. I'm going to give her personal information, but this is what we see. This is what we've lived together. And we took what was, the bump on the butt and turned it into a real beautiful success story and a real lovely spiritual place. And these buildings, like when we had the talk, the settlement building, this huge controversy about Project Most. I said, as I said when we were doing the walk, that's the Brontosaurus in the room, which is bigger than an elephant. We're not against that project. We're against destroying something that's irreplaceable out of the rationale of a project. And we would be the first to support it. And we have many ideas. But here's the issue that ties back to what you said earlier, Irwin. For 4 years, we've asked all parties involved with anybody that wants to develop or whatever their plan is, they'll come talk to us. The same discussion you had when you had the tour, when we had the walkabout. No one returns our calls. So when you say you want to do something, which is everyone's right, then why not talk to the community that already exists? And that's the rub. We've been designated non-community, but the truth is, and you saw it with your own eyes, we are an integral part of this community, an example that we're better, that we could all learn from. Fundamental in that community is its history. Without history, you're a non-person.
Well, I mean, I can really think of no better place to close than that. Again, it's for me, I want to live in a place where I know my neighbors. I want to live in the bucolic Queen Street I had growing up, Esperanza, where everyone knew everyone's neighbor, and my mother would go borrow a cup of sugar from whoever lived next door. I know I'm creating a imagery that is probably going back to the Ozzie and Harriet days, but
Right. I'm thinking very romantic, Irwin.
I have, I do have that side, that, Esperanza. But
But Irwin, before we finish, could I just say this because you triggered a memory? When I was a kid growing up in the Midwest, and I've talked about my own history, and people say to me, and we talk about struggles that African American people have had. Struggles don't define you. I would always say, and I've lectured all over the country, and it's kind of, you like this one. We were Ozzie and Harriet. We just happened to be Black.
Understood.
Mama nurse, dad a factory worker, lunch pail in the mornings, going out, everybody goes, shoes lined up. Everybody is the same.
Has their
We
own
have commonalities
of Ozzie and Harriet.
That's
yeah,
exactly.
It's their version. It's not us and the other. It's just
exactly.
version. Yes.
1000%. Kevin Scott, really, to anybody in our community, this guy is as welcoming as he sounds, Esperanza. He means it when he says, come on his porch and have a cup of coffee with him. And he really does. And
it's a worthwhile exploration. And, for all of our listeners, do listen to the Freetown episode if you haven't, because then you'll get more of the history. And also, we didn't really touch on all of the Montaukett and just really the history dating back to the 18th century, because that is how far back this goes. But really, to go and, if you can, walk the area, it will make a world of difference to your experience of what this place is.
And again, Esperanza, really, that's something. I'm not trying to make this an East Hampton Trails commercial or an Our Hamptons podcast commercial. I really am not, but that's part of those things that we're trying to do, whether it's Freetown, whether it's Leisure-Rama, whether it's Lazy Point, whether it's whatever.
Right.
There's more to it than just the bubble of the beach and the village,
right,
and everything else. There's just so much more.
It's talking to people in the community. It's that exchange where you will get the most benefit.
Kevin Scott, a sincere thank you for spending some time with us this morning on Our Hamptons podcast. We're grateful for your time and for the insight you did provide into the community. We appreciate it. And Esperanza, as always, a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. Coffee's on.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.